Hello, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Beek, and welcome to today's virtual Lunch and Learn on Summer Tree Stressors and Solutions. I'm also here with my amazing colleague, Quinn, and together we'll be staffing this virtual Lunch and Learn. For those of you all who don't know Trees Atlanta, we are a 40-year-old nonprofit organization, and our mission is to protect and improve Atlanta's urban forest. And we do this through planting trees throughout the city of Atlanta, through conserving the current trees that we have, through forest restoration and all sorts of tree maintenance, and also through educational programs such as this today. And we really invite you to check us out at treesatlanta.org and see how you can get involved. We also want to thank the City of Atlanta. They are sponsoring today's program and so many of our urban forest education programs, and they make these programs free and accessible for all. And also just thank you all for joining. Thank you for helping us with our mission of improving and protecting Atlanta's urban forest. And if you have any questions for today's arborist, we invite you to go to the Q&A, which is on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, and submit your question. And Quinn and I will make sure that we present those questions to today's arborist. We also will have a copy of the recording in about a week from now on our YouTube channel at Trees Atlanta. And there's so much great material on the YouTube, and we invite you to check those other sessions out. And then finally, after today, we're going to be sending out a survey, and we would really appreciate your feedback. They help us make even better programs the next time. For those of you all who are here for some CEUs for your ISA certifications, we will be dropping a link for that form at the end of today's session. And if you're having any problems with that link, go ahead and email us at education@treesatlanta.org, and we'll make sure you get those credits. I'm so excited about a lot of the upcoming events. Here are a few that I'd like to highlight. August 9th, Angela, who is here today as a speaker, will be a part of a plant healthcare workshop. And this is looking at some of the invasive species that are really close to the Southeast and just regionally. And there'll also be pizza and networking with other green space professionals and volunteers. And then on the 16th, which is Saturday, we have another really wonderful program where we're having a New York Times winning author Janice Ray from Savannah, as well as some other local authors and musicians, share an evening of story and sound in the urban forest at Trees Atlanta. And this is with some amazing partners with Boston Letters. And then finally, we have a really great event on Thursday, August 28th with our partners at West Atlanta Watershed at the Outdoor Activity Center. So just another site in Oakland City. And they will be sharing some of their incredible research on urban heat ATL, mapping the heat, and mobilizing for justice. There will also be lots of organizations there offering some of the resources that they have for the community as Atlanta continues to get warmer. And you can find out about these and so many other ways you can get involved with Trees Atlanta by following us on social media, or by signing up on our email newsletter, or just by going to our website. And finally, and most importantly, I'm so excited to introduce you to our two arborists today. We have Angela, and Angela is somebody that Quinn and I get to work with all the time at Trees Atlanta. She manages our tree care, our pruning, and our pest programs. She's an ISA certified arborist. She is qualified to do tree risk assessment. She holds a pesticide applicator license, and she's from Florida. She received her undergraduate degree from New College of Florida in environmental studies and biology, and really fell in love with the mangrove ecosystems there, and that drew her into urban forestry. And today you can find her at Trees Atlanta, teaching some of our tree pruning programs, coordinating our tree maintenance programs. And she just loves taking care of the trees in Atlanta streets and parks. And if you see her out on the streets, please give her a wave and say thank you. And then Kendra is really wonderful. She's a research scientist and team lead at Rainbow Ecoscience, which is a really wonderful organization. You should check them out. She oversees nationwide research trials. She has a very impressive background in tree care, including tree injection, arboriculture, and integrated pest management. Kendra holds a bachelor's of science in forestry from the University of New Brunswick and has a diploma in urban forestry. And Kendra attended Mississippi State University for her PhD in forest entomology. Sorry, that's my dog. She conducted international trials focusing on the effects of drought and forest management on invasive species. And at Rainbow Ecoscience, Kendra dedicates her efforts to the study of drought and drought tolerance in various landscapes. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to our first speaker, Angela.
All right, thank you so much. Let me share my screen. All right. Yeah, so I want to start our summer tree stress and solutions presentation. Just some basic ways that you can care for your trees if they are feeling the stress of the summer. Oops. Oh, all right. So starting off with why trees are so important and why we should care about trees. Trees absorb air pollution, and give us a cleaner and healthier air in our city. They protect our watershed and slow erosion. They shade homes, and can give you lower energy costs. They provide habitat and food for wildlife. They also provide privacy and sound dampening. They're aesthetically beautiful, awe-inspiring, and trees are important to Atlanta specifically because we are the city in the forest. We need to take care of it. And with that, the summer heat brings a lot of stress to trees. So far this summer, we've been pretty lucky. We've been having a lot of rain, but we have drier months ahead of us and hotter months ahead of us. We also are up against all summer's getting hotter and hotter every year with climate change. And so we need to take extra care of our trees with that heat and drought stress. And heat and drought stress can lead to compounding stressors in trees that Kendra is going to speak more on later. But yeah, urban trees are under a lot of stress. I added this photo here to kind of show two different micro habitats that trees grow in our city. So to the right here, we have trees that are growing in that right-of-way strip, that strip of grass between the road and the sidewalk. And trees growing in the right-of-way are under a lot more heat stress than the tree growing just to the left of it that has more grassy area. The oak in the area with more grass is able to absorb more water. It has a little bit less of that reflective heat from the asphalt. And it's generally going to be able to grow larger than the tree in the right of way. And so two pretty basic, simple ways and cost-effective ways that you can prevent heat and drought stress for your trees is by watering and mulching. Watering trees, of course, prevents that drought stress. And trees like a deep and infrequent soak of water for that healthy root structure. And keeping mulch around your trees helps trees be resilient to the heat as well. The way that Trees Atlanta cares for our trees, for our first summer after planting trees, we water all of our trees every 2 weeks with 5 gallons of water per caliper inch. So for our younger trees that are neighborhoods department plants along the city's parks and sidewalks, and in this photo here is a good example of one. They're about a 1 or 2 inch caliper, and so we give it 10 gallons of water every 2 weeks. The following 2 summers, we mulch and cultivate the soil around the trees, and giving the trees any other care that they may need by staking it. Yeah, water prevents heat and drought stress. You want to water every other week for the first spring and summer that your tree is planted, especially helping it get through that transitional period of being planted. And then it's good to water them for the following 2 summers as well. And you want 5 gallons of water for every caliper inch, and focusing that water on the root ball of the tree, which is right at the base. You don't need to water the leaves or the trunk of the tree, just watering the roots. And how to measure the caliper inch. So caliper inch, what I'm talking about is basically how thick the trunk is. You can do this in 3 ways. You can do it visually, just kind of estimating how thick that trunk is. Is it an inch? Is it 4 inches? But there's also 2 tools that you can use. There's a caliper inch tool, which is the black and yellow tool right there in the image. And that gives you a really specific measurement. And there's also a tool called a DBH tape, or a diameter at breast height tape. And this is used more for larger trees. Oh, and then here I added a resource for you of observed rainfall. So if we've had more than 5 inches of rain over the last 14 days, your tree doesn't need to be watered. It's gotten enough water from the rain. And this QR code and link is to a weather.gov website that shows how much rainfall our area has gotten. All right, and then a little bit more about why we mulch. Mulch does so many things for the tree. Mulch breaks down and replenishes soil. It retains moisture, insulates the soil, suppresses weeds, protects the trunk from mechanical damage by giving a visual barrier for weed whackers and lawnmowers to not get too close to the trunk of the tree. And it helps reduce soil compaction. So adding that extra layer of mulch helps prevent feet from stomping down the soil over time. Oh, I did want to talk about this photo here. This is a good example of like a nice hot steamy mulch pile. And the mulch gets hot and steamy because there's a lot of activity happening in the chips of the wood. There's a lot of fungus and bacteria breaking down the mulch. And that's why it's so good for the tree to have mulch, to give back to the soil, to break it down, and yeah, make that soil alive. Ways to mulch, there's 2 key parts. You want to expose the root flare of your tree. The root flare is where the trunk of your tree tapers out to that first root. You want that first root to be above the surface of the soil. And you want that because if it's under the soil, it will start rotting and decaying. And rot and decay at the base of your tree is not great. So exposing that root flare and then creating a mulch berm. So a mulch berm is like an earthy donut of mulch around the tree, creating a little bowl for the tree to be able to soak up that water when it does come, and preventing the mulch from piling up against the trunk of the tree. Like in this image here, this is what we call a mulch volcano, where the mulch is piled up against the trunk of the tree. This is pretty bad for the health of the trunk of the tree because it's retaining a lot of moisture right up against the trunk, the part of the trunk that's not supposed to be underground. And with this, it brings decay and rot as well as other pests like ants, ant piles, any kind of decaying insect. So generally, or this is not a good way to mulch. It's a really common way, but it's improper. Yeah, and then I included this image because this is a great example of mulch in a landscape. So this is in a yard, just a nice bed of mulch for this tree. I highlighted the mulch flare or the root flare of the tree there. So the root flare is exposed, which is good. And then mulch instead of turf all around the root system of the tree. Turf and grass are competitors for trees and tree roots because the turf takes up the water and nutrients first, leaving not much for the tree. So when in doubt, putting mulch on your tree, getting rid of your turf, and having mulch instead is better for the tree. Because in a forest, forests don't have thickets of lawns in there. Trees are used to having um, decaying wood and leaf litter on the forest floor. And then this is another example of mulch around a tree. And natural hardwood mulch is best. Dyed mulch isn't as great for your tree. So red mulch, black mulch is not a natural color for mulch. And yeah, natural hardwood mulch is best. But yeah, that's about all I have for the basics of mulching and watering. If you ever have any questions about trees on your street, please feel free to ask me. And also come on out and volunteer with us if you want to learn more hands-on ways to mulch and water. We have maintenance projects every weekend, and they're really pretty fun. But with that, I'm going to kick it on over to Kendra, who's going to give us some more details on what drought stress looks like in trees.
Awesome. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Angela, can you hear me okay?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. Just want to make sure. Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Thank you guys so much for having me. Thanks to Trees Atlanta for inviting me to give this talk. And Angela, you did a fantastic job talking through some of the beneficial uses of mulch and other ways that we can care for our trees in the urban landscape. We're actually going to kind of take a step back now and talk about some of the science behind drought, what's happening, what we're seeing with climate, because I think that that's sometimes a big question mark for some people. So we're going to talk about what's happening with climate, and then also what to look for in terms of drought stress in the landscape and on your own trees. So I have shared my screen. You should be able to see it there. So this is a little bit of an agenda or our learning objectives for today. So if I do my job well, you'll be able to understand the complexity of drought in our environment. You'll also be able to define drought and its impacts. Drought is something that we hear a lot in the news, we hear a lot in social media, we hear a lot in community meetings, and it's something that it's a term, drought, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot. And so we're going to work to understand that and how to define it, what exactly is drought, and then also its impacts. And then finally, we're going to connect the dots and understand different management options and build on some of what Angela has introduced to us today. So again, we're taking a step way back and we're going to start with what is drought. It's a very, very broad term. It's something, again, we hear about a lot all over the place in the news a lot. We hear it on social media. So what is drought? When you Google the term drought, you'll see a lot of images come up, okay? And they might look something like this. You might see a water reservoir that has been emptied. You might see this telltale kind of cracking eggshell ground. You'll see low rivers and estuaries. And overall, any water holding capacities or abilities of this land is overall diminished. So we're seeing low water levels and reduced water in some of these areas. So these are the scary images you're going to see on the news. You might also see things like crop impacts and other things like that. But there are different types of drought. So how do we define drought? The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, also known as NOAA, is the agency that we get most of our weather data from, okay? They're a fantastic team that tells us about hurricanes, about tornadoes, and also about drought, okay? They give us the information that we get every day to look at if it's going to rain outside, how hot it's going to be. And these guys define drought as a deficiency in precipitation over an extended period of time. It is a natural part of normal climate variability in many climate zones. The duration of droughts varies widely. Drought can develop quickly and last for only a matter of weeks, exacerbated by extreme heat or wind, but more commonly, drought can persist for months or years. Now, there's two things I want to draw attention to in this definition. That yes, drought is the deficiency in precipitation, but it must also be in addition to increased temperatures. So drought is defined as two things, both the deficiency in precipitation, so not as much rain, and increase in temperature. If one of both of those variables is not met, it is not considered a drought. Now, this is a video of the globe that's turning around. And what we can see here, this is showing us soil moisture and groundwater storage. In areas that the map is lighting up red, we see significant deficiency in groundwater. And then areas that it's lighting up blue, we see excess groundwater or 100% of normal groundwater holding capacity. And really what we can see here is that us in North America, we are not the only ones experiencing these drought instances or events. We see drought popping up really all over the globe in northern climates as well as southern climates. But bringing it back closer to home, we wanted to look at the US Drought Monitor to see how this drought is changing and affecting different areas in the US over time. Now, areas, again, in that dark red color are experiencing exceptional drought. So beyond extreme drought, almost no precipitation is occurring. And conversely, areas that are yellow are areas that are just slightly abnormally dry, okay, maybe experiencing a dry month or a dry week. And as we can see here, different areas of the US are going to light up in this red color. So we see as it lights up right now, drought can be experienced all over the US in whatever region you might be, whether you're in the Midwest or even the Northeast or in Southern California, you may experience drought at some point throughout the year. So three things I want to bring us back to. First, drought is a normal part of climate variability. And in some areas, it's actually vital to the survivalship of both the plants and animals in that area. There are areas in the desert that cannot withstand high capacities of rain. So drought is encouraged in those areas. We see increased temperatures and decreased rainfall being the two most important components of defining drought. And then finally, changing climates are actually showing us an increase in both frequency and duration. So we're seeing more droughts, they're happening much more frequently, and they're sticking around for longer. And this is because of this changing climate that we're experiencing. Now, there are several types of droughts that you might hear defined on the news or even in social media. And this is a pretty interesting figure. We're not going to walk through the whole thing. I just want to draw our attention to the right side of the screen where you will see the three major types of drought. The first one being meteorological drought. This is the type of drought that you hear about when you're listening to the weatherman or when you check your weather app on your phone. This is going to tell us if it's going to rain, if it's going to be hot today, if we're going to have higher winds. That's meteorological drought. The next one, and if meteorological drought gets severe enough, we will see what's called an agricultural drought. This occurs when we have impacts on our agricultural systems, on crops, and the ability to produce these crops is actually diminished or lowered because of this agricultural drought. And then finally, we see hydrological drought. And that brings us to the first few photos that I showed you. This is when we see reduced stream flow, we see reduced inflow to reservoirs, lakes, and ponds, and then finally reduced wetlands, and finally wildlife habitat. So again, this is increasing in time and duration as you move down, the first one being meteorological all the way down to hydrological impacts. So there are many things that go into the water cycle, okay? There are a lot of ways that we get water from climate and a lot of ways that we actually lose water to the environment as well. And this comes into play and is really important when we start talking about how to manage drought in the environment and how you can manage it at home as well. So the three main ways that we talk about when we're talking about street trees, The first is precipitation. So that's how much water is coming into our environment. I want you to imagine you had a bucket on your front lawn. How much water is falling into that bucket at any given time? That's precipitation, and that's how we recharge our soils and where our plants get a lot of their water. How we lose water from the environment is typically seen in evapotranspiration. So this can happen from oceans, lakes, and streams, but can also happen just from the land in front of your house. And then finally, groundwater. So this is the ability for any area to withhold or hold groundwater. So whenever you turn on that tap, that water is coming from somewhere. And whenever groundwater is diminished, we see significant impacts in our ability as a city or community to even access some of these storages. So how do plants use water? There are a lot of different ways that plants use water that are actually very similar to you and I, and it's important that we understand them in order for us to understand how we can address them. So plants lose water through transpiration, okay? Much similar to evapotranspiration. So the tree is able to pull up water by its roots. The water then moves through the plant, through the trunk of the tree, through these little straw-like mechanisms. And then it goes up into the leaf surface where the leaf then opens, and I'll show you what that looks like in just 1 minute. And then it's able to lose a lot of that water. So that is a constant pump that's occurring. So anytime you see a tree in an urban environment, think of it as a huge water pump that's able to pull massive amounts of water in and actually release it into the air for us. So what's actually happening when we dive down into what's occurring with these trees? So we can see on the top left, it's called a leaf stomata. So this is a very, very powerful microscope that's looked at the surface of a leaf. And if you watch closely, that leaf stomata is actually opening and closing. It's just like a mouth on the surface of the leaf. And when that opens, the plant is allowed to open that to cool itself off, but also to release water. And then conversely, we see at the root cross section where the plant is able to pull in this water, we see this very interesting coverage of this leaf section or this root cross section. So this is if I took a plant root and I cut it in half and I stained it and put it under a microscope. You can see that surface on the outside and then also this little tail that comes off. Now the tail of this root cross section is a fibrous root, okay? This is a root hair that comes off of the main parts of the roots, and the whole function of this is to increase overall surface area. So the amount of root that's touching the ground is increased with these hairs, and it allows the plant to pull in actually more water and then release it through that leaf stomata. So what's happening in the plant when we have reduced water, okay? If either it's letting off too much water with the leaf stomata, if it's hot, those will open up and allow the plant to breathe. Or are we not getting enough water in the roots? Both can be true. But what's happening at the cellular level that's causing this impact to the plants? There's something called turgor pressure. High turgor pressure is when this small pouch of water within the cell is full. And that water pouch is able to push out on the edges of the cell and really hold it up, okay? This is called the enlarged vacuole. And we can see that in the diagram on the left. So we can see that this is what's called a turgor state. We've got lots of water coming into the roots, and with the help of those root hairs, we can access all of that water. And we have a full enlarged vacuole holding up the cell wall. So that plant is able to stand upright and it's able to do all of the functions that it needs to survive and reproduce. Now, unfortunately, again, if we have too much loss through the leaves or we don't have enough water coming in through the roots, we have a shrunken vacuole. That's what you see here on the right. When we have a shrunken vacuole, that pouch or pocket of water within the cell is diminished. It's much smaller and it's not able to hold up the walls of that cell the way that we want it to. And that's when we start to see this low turgor pressure. We will call this a flaccid state or a flagged state. And that's when the plant starts to flag, keel over, and it's unable to reproduce and it's unable to photosynthesize the way that it needs to. That is what we typically see in a drought example. So how does drought impact plants? So we know where we get the water from, how plants use and lose water, but what happens when we have a drought or a drought-stressed plant, and how does this impact the plants? We can break impacts on plants down into three main categories. The first one being physiological response, the second one being biochemical response, and then the final molecular response. We're going to review these quickly, but they're not so vital to land managers at this point. So we'll go over these quickly, and if there's any more questions, you can absolutely reach out. So physiological responses, we see loss of turgor pressure. That's what we covered in the last slide. We will see a decreased recognition in root signals. So plants are able to talk to one another through their roots, and we actually see a decreased recognition of these signals when a plant is drought stressed. We will see decreased stomatal conductance, so those the stomatals that are able to open and close on the surface of the leaf are not able to do so the way that we really want them. And then finally, we see decline in photosynthesis. In biochemical responses, we see decrease in photochemical efficiencies, decrease in carbon dioxide fixing, which we need as humans. We need plants to fix carbon dioxide for us. And then we also see this accumulation of stress metabolites, so this buildup of stress within the plant itself. Finally, with molecular responses, we see an increase in stress responsive gene expression. So the plant is telling us that it's extremely stressed out. We see changes in hormone signaling, so an increase in abscisic acid levels, which is a really important growth hormone. And then finally, activation of heat shock proteins. So these are all of the things that are going on under the hood, right? So when we see a plant is stressed out, it's not just that it's stressed out, it's that there are other things going on underneath the hood that are really impacting the tree's ability to just survive in an urban landscape. So how does drought impact landscapes? What are we going to see? This is something that I think all of us have seen, whether you're a homeowner, a land manager, an arborist. These are telltale signs of drought or drought stress in a landscape. We can see this browning. We can also see what we call flagging or drooping of the leaves, where the leaves just look dehydrated and tired. But let's break it down to different parts of the plant and show what actually we might see depending on the area of the plant that we're looking at. So the first one being leaves. With the leaves of a tree or a woody shrub, we're going to see drooping, we'll see a lot of yellowing, see a lot of flagging, and then also senescence or death of the leaves itself. With flowers, you're going to see closed flowers, sagging of flowers. I love to put hydrangeas in here, not because they're obviously not trees, but they're very dramatic. When a hydrangea is drought stressed, it'll tell you right away. And you'll see the entire flower head just kind of droop over like that. You'll see reduced production, smaller flower, and then sometimes you'll actually see a later bloom, which will come into play in just one second. Next, and finally, we look into the canopy where we might see canopy thinning, we might see leaf loss, reduced flush, and then finally plant death if it's severe enough. And Angela did a fantastic job at covering some of these in her presentation as well. So bringing it back to sort of this changing climate and this climate shift, this is again showing temperature and precipitation over time throughout the globe. And we can see that, unfortunately, this globe is lighting up orange. So we do see these impacts of shifting climates as well as climate change. And the first thing I like to look at, since I am an entomologist, is what is happening with the insects. When we have shifting climates or drought experienced in an area, there is a significant impact on insect populations in that area. What we'll oftentimes see, and first when a plant is drought stressed, we'll actually see a decrease in its plant defense mechanisms. So every plant has its ability, both physical and chemical, to defend itself against both diseases and insects, much like you or I have an immune system. And again, much like you or I, when we are dehydrated and stressed out, we become more susceptible to insect and disease attack. And that's what's happening with the plants as well. We'll also sometimes see what's called a phenological mismatch. A phenological mismatch is a broad term that essentially is looking at the bloom of a plant and then a pollinator or insect's ability to live off of that plant. So before humans were around, we had plants blooming at a certain time. We had pollinators feeding on those blooms and other beetles feeding on those blooms. And these times had to match up almost perfectly within the year. But unfortunately, what we're seeing with changing climates and changing heat zones is we're seeing plants putting off bloom until they have enough energy storages, so later in the year. Some areas up north, we're seeing apples bloom in September and October, but we're seeing pollinators and other insects come out or emerge earlier in the year because it's warm, and that's what they use to tell them to emerge. So we're seeing this mismatch, this phenological mismatch between the host plant and a really important insect that we actually need to line up in order for the survivalship of some of these plants. We're also seeing greater populations with higher temperatures, and then we're seeing expanded ranges, which I'll show in just one second. We're seeing that long and severe drought events can actually decrease plant secondary defense compounds, and that drought stress trees emit pheromones that will actually attract pests. And this was something that I studied a lot. When we have a plant that is stressed out, specifically trees that are really stressed out because of drought, they emit this pheromone that actually attracts a lot of these insects to it. So now we have the plant that is stressed and drought stressed and already declining, and then we're adding insult to injury by putting these insects on there at a greater rate. Finally, we see wood borers and bark beetles during severe drought. And conversely, interestingly enough, we see sap-sucking insects and leaf miners are actually more severe during moderate drought. So even if we're in a moderate drought or a severe drought, we will have a group of insect that finds those plants really, really tasty. So this is a fantastic example of this phenological mismatch or this shifting climate. Just want to make sure that I'm on time here. So what we saw here, this was with a mountain pine beetle out west. We saw this area of trees that this mountain pine beetle has lived on for as long as we've been able to tell. Unfortunately, with a shifting climate zone, that beetle was able to make it over mountains into an area with what we call a novel host. So this is a group of trees that this pest has never been exposed to. And much like you or I, if we were exposed to a disease or an illness that we have never been exposed to before, we lack the ability to defend ourselves against it as well. So when this pine beetle was able to traverse the Rocky Mountains, make it over into this novel host or this new group of trees that it's never been introduced to, it went wild. And now we have a big concern of the impacts that this mountain pine beetle can have on some of these tree populations. We also see this with southern pine beetle, which people from Georgia are very, very familiar with. You've probably heard of southern pine beetle at some point. Southern pine beetle is a pest usually of forested pine plantations, and as the name suggests, has historically been an outbreak pest within the Southeast, okay? And years of research has gone into how can we best manage our forests to keep southern pine beetle at bay. Unfortunately, again, with shifting climate zones, this pine beetle has been able to move its way into the Northeast, and we do see it up in New York, as well as some other states in New England. So we are concerned that this could potentially be an issue due to these shifting climate zones. Now, I always love to talk about salt in our landscapes whenever I do a drought presentation, because I think that it's something that's commonly overlooked. If you speak to people in more northern climates, they put salt on their roads and it causes huge issues with their plants. And even when we do get frost and salt down here, you will see some cities put salt down on their sidewalks, and we see increasing impacts to the plants. But what we're also seeing is salt contamination in reclaimed water. So salt contamination affects more area than any other contamination, and some areas in coastal Georgia are significantly impacted by some of these flooding events. But we're seeing in arid regions evapotranspiration close to or exceeding the actual precipitation that's happening there. And again, this is more significant in some coastal areas, but you will also see it in some reclaimed water. So some cities that use reclaimed water, you will see that they are unable to significantly reduce the overall amount of salt, and sometimes that can be reapplied in your sprinkler system or in your irrigation. So what happens with salt? We don't have to dive into this too far, but essentially what happens when we have sodium and chloride that is introduced to the soil, it does a really great job at actually replacing and displacing the other nutrients. So all of those nutrients that Angela talked about, we're adding back to the soil with this mulch. If you add salt in there, it's actually able to kick those nutrients out and be pulled up by the plant. And then we see these chloride ions that are transported to the leaves and can actually interfere with photosynthesis as well as chlorophyll production. So essentially with addition of salt or salt stress, it's able to outcompete all of these other micro and macronutrients that we need in plants, and we see significant dieback and toxic levels in the plant. So Angela did a fantastic job at talking about different ways that we can use rainwater as well as mulch and other things to help reduce the overall stress on landscape trees. One thing that I always like to present, especially if I'm speaking to homeowners, if you are irrigating, make sure that you're irrigating sufficiently and efficiently. You should never see runoff on any hard surfaces. And that's something everybody always gawks at me at, and they say, yeah, right. I want you to go for a walk in the early morning, walk down your street and count how many irrigation systems you see and how much water is running off into a storm drain. That irrigation, you're not only paying for it, but it's not being used, and it is depleting our overall ability to keep those water reservoirs high, like I talked about earlier. And then finally, if you are able to, rainwater harvest appropriately. It's something that you can use in your own backyard, in your own lawn. And if you are a property manager, I always like to say, just encourage people and start that conversation. Rain barrels can be purchased pretty inexpensively, and they're an incredible tool for us to use to actually be able to address some of these stressors. We talked about mulch a lot. Angela did a fantastic job at touching on its ability to reduce soil moisture and, reduce soil temperature as well as retain moisture within the soil. We do not want the example on the left. We don't want a mulch volcano. We want a mulch donut. So the mulch should not be touching the bark of the tree. We can also work to plant drought-resistant species, plan drought-tolerant landscapes, and then one thing that I always really like to touch on is reducing overall hardscape. A lot of people really like the look of interlock in their front or backyards, and they really like to throw some beautiful stone into their landscape. But as soon as you do that, you compact the soil underneath that hardscape, and then you also produce a essentially water impermeable surface. So whatever rain is falling in that area, whatever irrigation you're using in that area is not able to make it through that barrier that you've just put in there. And then you've also just impacted or compacted the ground underneath. And so even what is making it through is usually running off into an area where it can't be used. So always work to reduce overall hardscape so that we can increase soil hydration and then also reduce compaction and overall runoff in your yard. So I buzzed through that really quick. I think I'm good on time. We'll just do a quick review. Drought is a global and nationwide phenomenon. Reduced water can impact leaves, flowers, and canopy. It can decrease plant defenses. We want to plan, mulch, and irrigate appropriately. And then sometimes in severe stress, you can use chemical applications or other applications of products to help support your plants in these times of stress. And I'm happy to carry that conversation and help you guys through that as well. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you guys so much. Again, I really hope that you learned something from it.
Thank you so much, Kendra and Angela. At this time, I just wanted to invite any participants, if you have any specific questions for our arborists today, this is a really wonderful opportunity to drop them into either the chat or the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we can get some of those questions answered. So I see a couple in here, and as people continue to drop some in, there was a question. You mentioned different colors of mulches and which the natural is best, Angela. What is the impact of having that lawn fabric under the mulch around a tree?
Kendra, do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the mulch, or sorry, with the lawn fabric that you purchase from a store is never going to be 100% organic made. Okay, so you're not going to have 100% cotton or hemp or something like that. And inevitably, there's always some type of synthetic material or fiber in that. And what happens is it doesn't break down. Okay, so you'll throw down the mulch the lawn fabric and the landscaping fabric, and with hopes to sort of deter weeds or something like that. I am not a huge fan, and I don't usually support putting and leaving any type of synthetic material like that into the environment. It's always best to go with something like mulch, a natural mulch if you can, as Angela said, just because, again, we don't want to support putting any of these synthetic fabrics. They never do quite what they're supposed to do, and they always end up hanging out for too long and then ending up in a landfill or somewhere else.
Thank you very much. Just a follow-up quick question with that. What about like sheet mulching or using cardboard or newspaper or something like that to suppress weeds? Does that have the same effect, or can that be broken down?
Angela, do you want to take this one, or do you want me to?
Yeah, cardboard is a lot better than the synthetic fabric because the cardboard can break down. It is made of paper, which is made of trees. So it's similar to mulch, not quite, but it will break down and can help suppress those weeds for longer. The best thing to do is just do a thick layer of mulch. Mulch like 4 inches, and that will suppress the vast majority of the weeds. 4 inches around everything except right up against the trunk of the tree, of course.
So keeping that nice donut. Thank you. Angela, you had shown a source for rainfall records. Could you drop, or what is the source for that for people?
Yeah, I just added it into the chat again.
Oh, great.
Oh yeah, and Quinn shared it. So yeah, it's weather.gov. It takes you to a map that looks different than the one I showed. You just have to go through the filters and have it filter for 14 days instead of last 24 hours. And then you can see the rainfall gauge map from that, and use the key to see how many inches you've gotten.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is another question about tree mulch. And there's a question about ground up tree mulch can take minerals from the soil. And they're wondering, they've heard that ground up tree mulch can actually take minerals from the soil. And they're wondering if you have heard that and if that is true.
I haven't heard that. And I don't know how that would be true. So I don't think that's true. Kendra, do you?
Yeah, I've never heard that either. And actually, ground up tree mulch is even better than larger pieces. The smaller the pieces, the easier the the soil as well as the insects can actually break down that wood and put it back into the soil. So, I would say actually the opposite. If you can access ground up tree mulch or smaller pieces, those are actually preferred over larger pieces.
That's great. And I think a resource that we would use sometimes is there's an app called Chip Drop, I believe, where you can request ground up trees to be dropped at your house or your project or your lands and use it. Okay, so is it often too late to save a stress plant by the time you see leaf die back, or is there still time to save it?
Do you want me to take this one? I can take this one.
Yeah, sorry, can you repeat it?
Yes.
Thanks.
So if you see a stress plant that already has some leaf dieback, is it too late, or is there still a chance to save it?
Oh, there's always still a chance. And you can always give the tree a better chance by giving it more care, especially if it's looking stressed. And so watering it more frequently, mulching it. We did have another question about whether or not to prune out the dead wood from trees. It's always good to prune out the dead wood branches that have died so that the tree can focus its energy on the living branches and not have to deal so much with the dead branches. But yeah, there's always a chance for the tree.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll add to that too, Angela. We always want to remove that dead wood. It is absolutely, as Angela said, better for the tree to be able to focus its resources. It also reduces liability of that piece of dead wood, depending on how big it is, falling on a pet or somebody playing in the yard. But additionally, any amount of dead wood in a plant is going to, attract insects and diseases. So that's a huge reason why we want to remove any of that dead wood as best we can. Now, you always want to make sure that you're doing it correctly. If you're not removing dead wood correctly, you can cut into active living vascular tissue and cause a lot of stress to the plant. So I would always say, like, contact your local arborist, or, you know, have somebody who knows what they're doing when you're talking about specifically removing deadwood from a drought stressed tree, because you don't want to actually make it worse. And absolutely, like Angela said, we want to focus on, you know, what caused this drought impact. Was it that you weren't watering the tree? Was it that you went through a dry spell and you forgot about the tree? So we can always, you know, start watering more, you know, put that mulch donut down. But then there's also other things like soil amendments that you can add, microbial amendments that you can add to just give that soil a boost. Anytime that we have mycorrhizae or any type of bacteria or fungi in that soil, that's going to help the plant be able to access those moisture stores in the soil. So healthy soil, continue watering, make sure that you are pruning any of that deadwood out correctly the right way.
That's great. Thank you guys so much.
I'm adding, if Quinn can add, but we do teach pruning classes for free at Trees Atlanta. We also have on our website a series of videos of pruning 101 videos so that you can learn the basics of how to prune properly. But if you're interested in pruning, I highly encourage you to come out and learn how to prune. Learning how to prune, you'll learn a lot about trees, different species, branching structures, the biology of trees. And it's one of my favorite things to do. But yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. So we have a question asking if the black or more red stain mulch is bad. What are your guys' thoughts on the dyed mulch?
It adds a dye into the environment that doesn't need to be there. Yeah, whether it's synthetic or organic, yeah, it's an added material into the environment that's not helping your tree. If you have anything else to add, Kendra.
No, I think you touched on it perfectly.
Great. And then can mulch attract termites?
Do you want me to take this one?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, I can take this one. That's a
Molecules.
really good question. And I feel like it kind of goes in the same vein as the tree root put a crack in my foundation, right? Which came first? So termites are soft-bodied insects, which means that they cannot survive for very long outside of essentially like a mud tube that they build. If you've ever actually watched termites or seen them in the environment, you will notice that they're always underneath bark of a rotting log or beneath some kind of an organic decomposing matter. And so if you have a mulch ring, you may have termites there. But they're not going to magically just train into your house like you might think of an ant or something like that. In order for a termite to make it from that mulch ring into your house, which I think is kind of where this question is going, are we going to have a termite issue? It's nearly impossible for them to make it that far. They have to build literal mud tubes to get from where they're going to where they are. Additionally, we want termites to be attracted to mulch. So mulch is only effective if it's broken down. You know, if it's not and it sits on top, absolutely, we can see that it might, you know, maybe reduce the temperature a little bit in that area. We might see an increase in soil moisture in that area. But where mulch is really most impactful is when it's able to break down and add nutrients to that soil and support that microbial community in that soil. And the only way that wood can break down and do that, because it's cellulose, the only way it can do that is with insects like termites, as well as other fungi and bacteria getting into that wood and being able to break it down and supporting that soil underneath that mulch. So mulch can attract termites. We do want termites to break down the mulch that we apply, but not in the way that you have to worry about termites getting into your home or having an issue with them in your house. Anything to add?
Thank you. So somebody said that laurel wilts has killed a sassafras tree in their neighborhood. And they wondered if Trees Atlanta had detected this disease around Atlanta. caused by the red ambrosia beetle?
We haven't specifically been tracking laurel wilt, but we do treat our young trees for ambrosia beetles. So when ambrosia beetles first start being active in February, we go out and spray the trunks of our trees with a pesticide to prevent the ambrosia beetles from entering into the trunk of the tree. Because once a young tree has been infected by ambrosia beetle, it's done for. So to protect our trees, we proactively treat them. And we use a chemical called bifin. Yeah.
Is that something that Trees Atlanta offers in different neighborhoods or only with the trees that Trees Atlanta has planted? Would they need to call like an arborist or certified arborist to do that if it was in their yard?
Yeah, Trees Atlanta only takes care of the trees that we've planted. For trees in your yard, it's best to go to a local certified arborist company, and they can care for your tree. We often recommend bouquet tree and arbor guard and peach tree arborists. Those are a couple local ones that are reputable.
And there's a Georgia Arborist Association webpage too with a great directory of different arborists that have been certified. Somebody had a question about 2 sourwoods that they planted last December. I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, but they said they have not completely greened up from their pretty light orange tint and they have not bloomed. And one even has dead looking bare trunk top. And they're wondering, and I think you touched on that when you're talking about getting rid of all the things, but should they be trimming the top? And is there anything else that you all recommend for their sourwoods?
Yeah, so to me, this sounds like the trees are experiencing some transplant stress, which is normal, but can lead to a tree's decline. And I would recommend pruning out the dead wood from the tree and keeping it watered every 2 weeks. And yeah, just generally keeping an eye on it. Do you have any other suggestions, Kendra?
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly what you said could just be general transplant stress, but if you're still finding that the tree is not looking great, maybe declining even as we get into the fall, and you are actively irrigating, deep irrigation. So you want deep, infrequent irrigation. You don't want to go stand out with a hose every night for 5 seconds. You want deep, deep irrigation into the ground. So if you're actively watering correctly, the tree is mulched. There could be an issue with how the tree was planted. So, I would recommend maybe monitoring it until the fall, continue with your irrigation regime and keep that mulch on it. And if you're still having issues with it and it's still just not taking off, it could be an issue with maybe it just wasn't planted correctly, whether it be root bound or too deep. So I would say leave it for now, keep an eye on it, continue with best practices and monitor it into the fall.
Awesome. Well, I think we're at time. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to email those to us at education@treesatlanta.org.